Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Megan from Jackson Heights Indivisible, and I just want to take a minute before we get started to share a few things that we've learned through our work as a grassroots pro-democracy community group. First of all, every action matters. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening around us, but every action, big or small, makes a huge difference. Second, showing up is an action, so thank you for being here. Simply taking the time to participate is an important first step. Third, don't overthink how to get involved. Find something you care about and jump in. There's no perfect way or perfect time to start. Fourth, perfection isn't required. We don't have to do anything perfectly. We just have to do it. Finally, build community. Get to know your neighbors. One of the most powerful ways to push back against division is by connecting with the people around you and reminding each other that we're not alone. Those are a few of the lessons that have guided our work, and we're so glad you're here with us. Before I introduce our speaker, I have two quick requests. First, if you're not already involved with a local civic group, I encourage you to find one. Organizing locally is one of the most effective ways to create change. You can find or start an Indivisible group at indivisible.org. Second, after this presentation, I hope you'll invite 2 other people to take action with you. Every new person that leaves a public comment strengthens our collective voice. Thanks again for joining us, and we're fortunate to have an incredible speaker with us, Dr. Rachel Ross, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Ariane. Thank you, everyone who's here watching. We are actually re-recording something that was live and didn't work, but I think this is going to work out for everyone. I'll note that we had a lot of participants, and it was really fun to see where everyone was coming in from. So thank you to everybody who participated in the original viewing. For those who are watching on your own time, we have some ground rules letting people know that this was being recorded, but that we kept everybody's participation private. Chat files were not saved, notes were generalized, so that anything that comes out afterwards is not including anybody's names, save for mine. And some of the formatting of what you will see was done with the help of the AI and also with the help of some of my colleagues, but everything's been human checked and verified and finalized by me. So for today, what we are going to do is tell you about this proposal, OMB 2026-0034-0001, talk about its implications and its impact, talk about specific sections of the rule in order to help you write an effective public comment. And in the original agenda, the plan included time to write your own comment. And I would recommend for anyone watching this at home, expect to spend 10 to 15, maybe 30 minutes even writing your own commentary, because it does take some work on your part. And so that's what we're doing this for, to help support everyone doing that work so that we can be stronger together. We started out with a knowledge check first to see how many people were familiar with the proposed rule. And most of the attendees had heard of it, but very few knew much about it. And second, we asked to see how many people had participated in public comment process from the federal government, as it is a standard part of our democracy historically. And actually, many people had done that previously. So it was really heartening to see the engagement. I want to make sure that everyone knows what the proposal is. It comes from the Office of Management and Budget, which is technically part of the executive branch, and it affects the universal framework governing every federal grant to every agency in the federal government that is currently working independently within the federal government. So these are not political agencies. These are agencies that tend to be able to set their own priorities. What this proposal does is it proposes major revisions to the federal fund regulation, which is called 2 CFR Part 200, and it affects all of the independent government agencies that would administer cooperative agreements, scientific grants, and other federal awards. As it's written, it combines all of the executive orders that have come out over the past year that were legally suspect or taken down, and it codifies them into a new normal that is comparatively legally airtight, which puts all of these independent agencies at the mercy of political priorities by the head of an appointed politician from the executive branch. And this could substantially reshape how research, education, healthcare, and very many federal assistance programs are funded and administered. This upends our democratic norms and yokes these independent agencies to the political priorities. And it's really important that as many people as possible comment about how they believe this will affect them. It seems in the past week that the Heritage Foundation has been pushing its members to submit comments in support of the rule, though previously most of the comments were very much against the rule. They're flooding the zone with pro the rule comments, and that allows them to cover up what we've been doing. So if we show how the proposed rule and the changes would affect active awards, peer review, clinical trials, biomedical workforce, transportation, feeding assistance programs, anything that you can think of, that will carry weight and that will have meaning to offset the various comments that don't have substance within them. Most of my perspective comes from being a scientist and a doctor. And so a lot of what I will share is going to be related to things that matter to me and my life and my career. However, federal agency funding and the federal government uses this rule for uniform guidance to send grants to state and local governments. And in 2024, that was $1.1 trillion that funded things like Medicaid, transportation, education, food assistance programs, things like special education, many things that so many community members use, not just related to science and medicine. What would happen, as far as I think about it, is that political appointees can override the expert judgment or the interest of the experts who have been working at these federal agencies and block things that don't advance the president's or the executive branch's priorities, and would have the capacity to extend that power over any funds that go to any of the things that are listed here, not just to science. Any active grant could end up being canceled in the middle of its delivery because it no longer serves the changing national interest. And that could happen as, the political winds change and a different person is in charge of the executive branch. Entire categories of funding could be discontinued, and the rule offers the opportunity to not even say anything publicly about those changes. These federal grants are really important to everything that our world, that our states and our communities run on. They represent, on average, 36 cents of every dollar that a state spends. And I've gotten this information from a Substack article from a former program officer at the NIH named Elizabeth Ginexi. And I've put the link down there in case you want to read more about the way in which this rule would affect pretty much everything in our lives. And it puts this financial partnership between the government and all of these agencies and all of the outcomes under political control, not legislation. There's no capacity of Congress to do anything about this. And it would become effective on October 1st. So the rule was actually put out on May 29th, which was a little over a month ago. We're about 5 days away from the deadline now, 6 when we first recorded. It is possible between now and October 1st for Congress to block the review or block the proposal. And this will very much ride on what we offer and what we tell our Congress folks and what we leave as public commentary that becomes part of the legal registry. So our goal for you watching this is to leave with a submitted or nearly ready public comment on this proposal. And I want to make sure you know you do not need to be an expert. You do not need to be a scientist. Your comment doesn't need to be long. The comment can be as short as you want, as long as it's specific, personal, and clear. And I will walk you through how to make sure that you do it that way. In today's session, after I walk you through the various sections, you will be able to pick out what you think is interesting. And I do recommend that you use the links that I will show later to go and look through the entire document on the Federal Register or on regulations.gov yourself in order to ensure that you fully understand what you're writing about and how you're experiencing it and how you would adapt it. We will give you a 4-part structure as a template to set up your own comment. And I recommend that you include your own personal words, a real example, and something that matters to you. Keep a copy, but then submit it online. And you can submit it anonymously. You can submit it as an individual. And there's also an opportunity to submit as an organization if you happen to represent a group. Organizations may carry a little bit more weight because in the government, it's more likely that an organization would sue the government than an individual actor would do that. But as I mentioned, anyone can write a comment. You do not have to be a citizen. You do not even have to be in this country. You just have to be someone who has thoughts about this particular proposal. After you have done this work, we recommend that you talk to other people about it. Amplify it in whatever way that you connect, and share your updated resources, the things that we will send you or the things that are linked below, with everyone you know, but at the very least 2 people. If each of us extends in a tree, we can branch out and hopefully make a difference. This is a quick link to a bunch of resources, and I am going to show you what each of these individual resources look like, starting with this middle one, which allows you to submit your comment so you know what that looks like. I'm going to have to take just a minute to stop my share and to share a different screen. Okay. What you can see if you go to that middle resource page, or if you go to regulations.gov and search for this OMB proposal 2026-0034-0001, is the opportunity to write your own comment. There's a box here that is limited to 5,000 characters, and you can put your comment there. If it happens that your comment is longer than 5,000 characters, you can attach a file, and you'll see that it takes Word documents, it takes PDFs, it takes images, whatever you want to attach. You can attach up to 20 of them, but there is a limit to the size of the files, but it does allow you to write a longer comment if you are so inspired. I do recommend uploading a PDF so you can ensure that whatever you've put up is not tampered with and remains the same as what you initially put. You do not have to put your email address if you do not want to, but the reason to put your email address is so that you can get follow-up, to know that your comment has gone through, and then to know when the OMB has responded to your specific comment. If you don't put your email address, it is absolutely fine. You will get a tracking number when you submit your comment, and just write that down and keep it with your comment so you know to go back and search for the response. If you don't put your email address and you decide to be an anonymous contributor, just click this link and everything will be fine. If you do want to promote who you are as a human and include your email address, you can click the link for individual here. And again, if you don't have to put your email address, you don't have to receive the email confirmation. It is entirely up to you. You do have to click the reCAPTCHA, and you do have to click on submit a comment at the bottom in order to make sure it goes through to get to the point of having that tracking number, which you'll be able to follow, and some other organizations may follow as well. So this is that middle link. This is what will take you to the place to write your comment. But if you click on this link right here, it will actually take you to the full regulation proposal for federal financial assistance. And here you can see this is the summary as well as the entire list of all of the parts. And I don't want to give anybody a headache, so I'm not going to go all the way through, but you'll note there's background, there's a lot of information, there's a bunch of goals that are named that may or may not be reasonable. And then there's subsections, which I'm going to just come on down. You'll see these subsections. And these sections are important because you're going to need to refer to them directly when you write about your own specific concerns. Other things that are interesting on this page that you can see are the number of comments received so far. This is actually 10,000 more comments than yesterday, which is pretty cool to see. Although I don't know if they're what the nature of those comments are. And you can actually read other people's comments. So you can see that only about half of those comments have been processed thus far. but this gives you the opportunity to click on those comments. They are all public. They're all available. Names are available if you put your name in, but it also shows up as anonymous if you do not. One other thing to say is that if you go to the Federal Register to search for the same regulation for federal assistance, there is, it's the same exact content, but there's actually an extended bit more. So you can see all of the different agencies that are affected by this rule. And you can see it's not just science, the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice, the Federal Communications Commission, the National Credit Union Association or Administration, excuse me. All of these are currently independent agencies that act based on their own determined goals. Two other things I'm going to show you are the other links on that resource page, which are also available below this video. One is MyLab's GitHub, which has a bunch of PDFs that have resources that may be helpful to you, including a step-by-step submission guide. Many of these are PDFs, and just so those who don't use this platform, you will need to download the PDF in order to make use of any of the links that are in it, because the links are not live from the platform. And then the last resource I want to share is the Stand Up for Science action site, which will provide opportunities to submit your comment, although I do recommend sticking with the regulations.gov website directly, because this is just adding a layer on top of that. But it will remind you to call your members of Congress to let them know what you think about this proposal, or to email your members of Congress, or you can donate to them to help them fight this rule from going through. So I'm going to go back to the presentation now and spend some time again going through the actual specific subsections. And sorry, I look at my screen, but I also need to share it. Okay. So the resources again, you can access the links below or use the QR codes as you wish. So I'm going to give you my perspective on what's important in the subsections within the proposal rule. Starting with what I think are the most potentially important, those that refer to how grants are administered, and how they can be ended with minimal discussion, how they could be or they will be reviewed by a political appointee rather than the experts who would otherwise be reviewing the proposals for funds. And also the program planning and priorities, section 202, which requires all grants to be aligned with whatever the current priorities of the administration are. I'm very concerned for how these would affect stability of funds. I'm very concerned for how this would affect the independence of each of these agencies and the funding that results through their attribution. And I think that it's strange to allow or ask for all grants or all projects to be aligned with political priorities that would change every 4 years based on our current government and style. So I would ask that you think about what would happen if a grant or a project is stopped in the middle for minimal reason. What do you think is important about how funds are reviewed and how your tax dollars get dispersed and spent? Who do you want to be making those choices? And what work that we have going on requires long-term continuity? If priorities shift on a 4-year basis or even shorter, what happens to a transportation project? A bridge does not get built in that short of a time. So those are, I think, major concerns. The next set are things that, actually, sorry, 206, I would say, goes along with the rest of these because it allows for the termination or some of these requirements to be applied to individuals, not just to the funds themselves. So if I apply for a grant, but the government or whomever the political appointee doesn't like the groups that I'm involved in, that could lead to my funds not being dispersed. That could lead to my grant being terminated because of my own personal involvement. And that seems like quite a bit of government overreach. Now, admittedly, government overreach is not something that this current administration cares about. So I'm not sure that would be a useful thing to include in your statement. But if you consider what the language is, which is actually very vague, and it talks about DEI or anti-American values, which are not well described, not specific, and would therefore be hard to adhere to, you might consider how that would affect how people are engaged or even are able to apply for some of the funds that would allow them to do work outside of their areas, to do work outside of their communities, or even within community. Similarly, there's this 220 restriction on foreign collaboration, and it says that the funds allotted cannot be used for collaboration with certain countries or with entities that engage with certain countries. And so there's sort of like a no talk list that would affect a lot of the work that people do. And I think for me in science, participating on a global stage is really important to the generalizability of my work. It allows my work to have more meaning. It allows my work to have more spread. And if I can't use funds to work with colleagues in other countries, then I can't work with colleagues in other countries. And I think that sets us back in science in this country. Similarly, conference attendance. I absolutely use government funds in order to go to these professional conferences that allow me to interact with my colleagues. And this rule proposes that all conferences must be pre-approved, written in the original proposal, and politically approved. And that would get in the way of how we actually work in a year. Most of the grants that I write are for 5 years, and that means I'd be planning out my life travel and the science I haven't even figured out yet 5 years in advance, which for me would be complicated. But I think you could think also about how disseminating information or allowing people who work in similar fields to get together and talk about those things would be affected by not being allowed to use these government funds for that engagement. Similarly, the restrictions on using funds for memberships and subscriptions would affect how people engage in societies and are able to go to conferences or even are able to publish their work. There's a restriction on publication and especially on open access costs, which is how I'm able to use to actually publicize the work that I do and send it out and allow it to exist outside of a paywall so that any of you can read what we've produced with the tax dollars that you have given us through the government agencies. There is a change in the requirements that really aligns with this current administration, and it affects the use of language as well as the specific populations that we're allowed to engage our funds to work with. And that will have very significant impacts on the health disparities that we've already determined are a problem for various historically excluded or marginalized populations. And that's something that is, again, complicated to think about because pointing it out works in favor of this current administration. But I am vehemently against not using this type of language and not considering the realities of how far we've come and how much farther we can go if we consider the ways that our interventions or our access affects different groups differently. Finally, there's a prohibition on using the funds to publicize any changes or any opportunities for getting more funds, as well as publicizing the findings that come or any advertising that would need to be done in order to bring people in to make use of the funds. And those to me seem to be at odds with making sure that what we're doing is actually filling the public good and providing and giving back to the world of people who are, through their tax dollars, allowing this money to be used for the national interest in what I think is the national interest. So I think, yes, those were some sections that I picked out because I think they're going to cause major problems. And I think they're generalizable beyond just science. Though, again, a lot of my experience and therefore a lot of my ideas about how they'll affect me come from my experience with science. Now, we have a 4-part structure to how to write a comment that is effective. And I'm going to go through the structure, and then I'm going to give a couple of examples and remind you that you can go back to the regulations.gov page, to the comments that have already come through and been processed, not responded to, but at least posted, and you can read other people's comments. Not a lot of them adhere to this structure, but this is the way to make sure that your comment gets counted, tallied by the people on the other side, and requires a substantive response. So you start with telling them who you are, and it's anything. You don't have to be any of these things listed. You can be a concerned community member. You then want to make mention of what your concern is. And you do need to include a specific reference to the sections that you're talking about that are applicable. You can write 1 paragraph per section. You can write 1 comment per section, or you can weave a couple of sections together to write your comments, which is the way that I tend to do it, but may not be. It's certainly not the only way, and I don't have any clue what is the best way. After you've written what you're concerned about and stated the section that it's coming from, this is where you need to bring your own personal experience to the table. You need to write about the real impact that you expect to see, that you could consider might happen and affect you or people you care about, people in your community and programs that you work with. The more concrete you are, the more likely your comment will stand alone, because it's highly unlikely that your personal experience is going to be exactly shared by anyone else who writes a comment. So being very specific to your experience and what you think might happen will help delay the process of this rule going through, potentially help get in the way of the proposal passing or going into effect in October. The last thing is to be very sure that you ask the OMB to do something differently. And the number one thing I recommend is to ask the OMB to withdraw the provision. If you have a good idea for how they might revise the proposal, you can absolutely put it in, but I wouldn't recommend them to revise if you don't give them a concrete way to do so, because that could end up going sideways. You could also ask them to withdraw the entire proposal rather than specific subsections or provisions. It is entirely up to you what you ask them. So this is a sample comment that I came up with, which hopefully you can read here, pause if you want to read it. It's just my own experience as a community member whose family has benefited from participating in clinical trials that are run locally. And I'm concerned about section 200.340 because it allows for grants to be terminated at any time. And I'm also concerned about section 200-.202 about the requirement to align with political priorities. And I put those two together because I think they together are my whole concern. And I wrote specifically that we had a clinical trial that lasted longer than the 4-year political cycle. And it required the trial medication and enough people to be enrolled over time, as well as follow-up surveys for an extended period of time. And if funding is available, it was supposed to run for 10 years to make sure that there were enough people testing out the drug and also making sure that enough people didn't have negative outcomes in a long-term way. And if the trial would have been terminated in a 4-year period or even less, that would lead to a bunch of people not knowing what was happening, not being able to stay in the trial, not being able to get a medication they might have been using. It might lead to potentially unwanted side effects because we don't have a long enough timeline that we understand what's going on. And it would really get in the way of the researchers doing anything worthwhile. And I think that enhances waste, which is something that this proposal is supposed to reduce. So I ask that the OMB withdraw the provisions as well as the entire proposal to preserve a process guided by evidence, expertise, stability, congressional and researcher intent, and community need. This is a second sample comment that I made up based on looking at the public commentary that's out there from a retired librarian who mentioned that they're interested in ensuring their information comes from the best authorities, just based on their own expertise. And they wrote about 3 different sections, which together downgrade the importance of peer review, elevate politically motivated approval, and reduce support for researchers to interact with each other and the public. And they wrote a little something about what they perceive as the real impact or harm. And I will say this one talks about the impact on researchers, which I imagine this person may have been in the past, but also talks about their impact on themselves and what they care about in terms of seeing what comes out of that research. And they asked the OMB to withdraw the provisions. So those are some templates, a structure that you can use to ensure that your comment is substantive and effective and requires a response from the OMB. Before you submit, here's a checklist to make sure. Did you mention the actual proposal by name and the specific subsections by number? Did you include at least one real example? Did you use your own words? And did you describe your concern with specific and concrete language? Finally, did you include or not include your email or personal information? If you don't want anything public about your own personal experience, be careful about how you write about it. If you go with posting anonymously, and even if you do post with your email, make sure you save your confirmation and tracking number. You can submit multiple comments, whether or not you use your email. You can submit multiple times every day, multiple times a day. But it also is fine to submit one comment that includes everything. Every concern that you bring up in a substantive manner will require a direct response from the OMB, and that is legally required for this proposal to go through. If you're ready to submit, here we are with the QR code again, and you can go right ahead and good luck. Remember, I think it will take you about 20 minutes to go through the process of putting together your substantive comment. I've seen some people do it in 10 minutes, but it requires some reading. It requires some time spent with the proposal. You can feed it to an AI agent, and you can also use Control F on the website to find the elements that are of interest to you. I recommend going back in this video to the sections that I pulled out. Use those to help organize how you search through the regulation itself. In the links below, we've included some flyers that you can use if you want to pass this around to people. We've also included a resource sheet that actually has even more of the subsections listed with prompts and things that might be interesting to non-scientists that we've crowdsourced. And it also has the template so that you can point people just to this resource page or send it around to them without them having to sit through this talk, which was more engaging without me being alone. I will say thank you for your time, and thank you for the time you're about to spend to participate in democracy and help us save science and save federal agency independence. I think more than that. I will ask Megan, are there any questions that were asked last night that you think I should address again here that I didn't already? I do think the OMB is not legally allowed to ignore the comments. Someone asked about that. The judiciary branch, however, because this is not legislation, can't do anything about this proposal without Congress bringing it as a problem. And Congress can block this, but the judiciary cannot. Whereas the judiciary had success blocking the executive orders. The way that this goes through is if the OMB does not effectively respond to every comment that is substantive that gets posted. If they do not respond effectively, then there can be legal action that an agency or another group like Research America or standupforscience.org would bring, and potentially through the slow process of the legal system, undo this proposal, which is a regulation coming from the executive branch. I will also mention that it's a government website. Government websites are notoriously slow and they cause problems. So if you have trouble submitting your comment, take a step, make sure you save what you have in a document and try again in a later time, 20 minutes, an hour, later in the day, whatever works. The closer we get to July 13th, the more likely more people will be trying to use this system and it will get clogged. So there may be difficulty getting your proposal or getting your response submitted, but it's worth being persistent here. It's really important to make sure your comment goes through. Every comment counts, and the more comments, the more likely we'll be delaying the rule going through at the very least, even if we can't stop it. But there has been success just this past year with the designation of tenured independent government contractors who work within the government, the federal government. A similar proposal from the OMB came out that got about 90% negative commentary, and it was not allowed to go through. And so the executive branch keeps putting out executive orders around it, but they haven't been able to make this a thing. So I think there's hope here. And I do think, again, every comment can count. So please make sure yours does.
Rachel, the
Okay.
only question I would also answer is from last night about concerns for non-citizens engaging in this process, or whether you have to be a citizen to submit a comment.
Yes. So you do not have to be a citizen to submit a comment. And if you are concerned as a non-citizen, whether you sit in this country or you sit in another country, you can use the process of submitting anonymously. I do not believe they will be tracking IP addresses. One never knows. I do believe they will be using AI for the reading of the comments. But if you comment anonymously, there, to my knowledge, is no way for them to track that back to you. And if you are concerned, it would also be okay to go to a public library and use a public computer in order to post your anonymous comment. There were two other questions, actually. Someone asked if we can be rude, and I would say you can be whatever you want to be, but for your comment to be most effective, I would aim towards civility and think from the perspective of the people who will be reading it, who unfortunately are probably not aligned with your perspective. And if you want to provide a rude comment, do that on its own and provide a substantive comment separately. And their responses have to be public as well. So everyone will see both your comment and the response that comes to it. You can respond to their response, but to my knowledge, there's not a forum for it. So the response, if you are unsatisfied, is really to go a legal path. I'm not sure when a decision will come from this, but we have the period of time between July 13th and October 1st in order to potentially take legal action or to really ask our representatives to support us and to fight this and to ensure that it doesn't go through. I think that is everything. And I want to say thank you again for your time. And if you know me, you're welcome to follow up and ask any questions. And if you don't, sorry, you can make comments on this YouTube video and we can try to take a look at that over the next week while this is active. Remember, the deadline is July 13th, and the earlier you post the comment, the better the likelihood of it going through effectively without causing you a headache. So please, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And don't forget to share this with at least 2 other people.